The night everything changed, Grace Holloway pressed her palm against the glass doors of Chicago Memorial Hospital, leaving behind a smudge of exhaustion. 16 hours. That was how long she had been on her feet, moving between beds, holding hands, saving lives, and watching others slip away, despite her best efforts. The night shift always took something from her, but she gave it willingly because someone had to care. The November wind cut through her scrubs as she stepped into the darkness. She should have changed into street clothes, should have called a cab, should have done 100 things differently. But Grace was tired, bone-deep tired, and her small apartment was only 8 blocks away. 8 blocks she had walked 1,000 times before. Chicago at 3 a.m. was a different city. The business towers stood dark and silent, their daytime energy drained away. Streetlights cast pools of yellow on wet pavement, and somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Grace pulled her jacket tighter and started walking, her sneakers making soft sounds against the concrete. The boy who changed everything earlier that night. They had brought in a kid, 17 years old, gunshot wound to the shoulder, bleeding out on her table. His friends had dumped him at the entrance and disappeared like smoke. Grace had looked into his eyes, seen the fear there, the youth beneath the gang tattoos, and made a choice. She fought for him. 3 hours of surgery, 30 units of blood, a team of doctors and nurses working in perfect rhythm while Grace held pressure on the wound that wanted to steal his life. They saved him. She saved him. And when his eyes opened in recovery, when he whispered a broken thank you, Grace thought she had done something good. She was wrong about that. The alley appeared on her left, narrow and dark between 2 buildings. Grace had passed it countless times, never giving it a second thought. Tonight, 3 figures stepped out from the shadows, blocking her path forward. Her heart kicked against her ribs, adrenaline flooding her system the way it did in the ER when a patient crashed. Run. Every instinct screamed it. But her legs felt frozen, her body betraying her after 16 hours of constant movement. The men spread out, cutting off escape routes with practiced ease. You, the nurse who saved Tommy Rodriguez? The speaker was tall, wearing a leather jacket despite the cold, his face hidden beneath a hood. Grace's mind raced. Tommy Rodriguez. The boy from tonight? The gunshot victim. I'm a nurse, she said carefully. I help everyone who comes through those doors. Wrong answer. The second man moved behind her, blocking retreat. Tommy's crew? They the ones who shot up our corner last week? Got 2 of ours killed? You saved him. You picked a side. I didn't pick anything. Grace's voice came out steadier than she felt. I'm a nurse. I took an oath to help people. All people. That's not about sides. The third man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Everything's about sides in this city. You just didn't know you were playing until now. The violence, the first blow came from nowhere, knocking her sideways into the brick wall. Pain exploded across her cheekbone, bright and sharp. Grace tried to scream, but a hand clamped over her mouth, rough and smelling of cigarettes. They dragged her deeper into the alley, away from the street, away from help. She fought. Kicked, scratched, bit down on the hand covering her mouth until she tasted blood. Someone cursed and struck her across the temple. The world tilted, sounds becoming muffled and distant. Through the haze, she felt fists connecting with her ribs, her back, her stomach. Heard the fabric of her scrubs tearing. This is what happens, the first man said close to her ear. When you save the wrong person? Grace curled into herself, trying to protect her head, her organs, anything vital. She thought about Nina, her best friend, waiting for their usual post-shift breakfast. Thought about the patients who needed her tomorrow. Thought about how unfair it was to survive 16 hours of saving lives only to die in an alley because of it. Then she thought nothing at all as darkness. Pulled her under, the man in the shadows, Grace. Woke to the sound of voices, male voices, tense and afraid. Her left eye would not open, swollen shut, but through her right she saw shapes moving in the dim light. Someone was crouching beside her, a hand gently touching her throat, checking for a pulse. She's alive. The voice was deep, controlled, but underneath it ran something cold and dangerous. Barely look, man. We didn't know. One of her attackers, his earlier confidence gone. We just wanted to send a message about Tommy. You sent a message? The man beside Grace stood slowly, and even through her haze of pain, she sensed something change in the air. Now I'm going to send one back. Grace tried to focus on him. Dark coat, expensive looking. Tall, broad-shouldered. His face was partially hidden by shadows, but she caught a glimpse of sharp features, dark hair, and eyes that looked black in the dim light. Who are you? One of the gang members demanded, trying to sound tough, but failing. The stranger ignored the question. He knelt beside Grace again, his movements careful, gentle in a way that seemed at odds with the threat radiating from him. Can you hear me? He asked softly. Grace managed a tiny nod. Speaking felt impossible, her jaw throbbing where they had hit her. I'm going to get you help. His hand brushed hair back from her forehead, the touch surprisingly tender. But first, I need you to tell me something. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. Who hurt you? Grace's working eye focused on his face. In the faint light from the street, she could see him clearly now. Mid-30s, with the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers, except for the absolute coldness in his expression. He was looking at her like she mattered, like her pain had shifted something fundamental in his world. Them, she whispered, the words scraping her throat raw. All three. The man nodded once. Then he stood and turned to face her attackers, and Grace saw their faces go pale. Jackson Reed, the leader breathed. Holy hell, you're Jackson Reed? I am. Reed's voice carried no emotion, which somehow made it more terrifying. And you just made the worst mistake of your very short lives. The power behind the name Grace had heard the name Jackson Reed. Everyone in Chicago had. Tech billionaire, philanthropist. The man who had bought Chicago Memorial Hospital 2 years ago and poured millions into upgrading equipment and increasing staff salaries. He attended charity galas, shook hands with politicians, smiled for cameras. The papers called him the city's golden boy, a self-made success story. But the men in this alley were not seeing the Jackson Reed. They were seeing something else entirely. Something that made them back up until they hit the opposite wall. Please, the leader said. We didn't know she was under your protection. She wasn't. Reed pulled out his phone, made a call. Until now. Yes. I need a medical team at my location. Emergency pickup. And send Thomas with his crew. He hung up, slipped the phone back into his pocket. The question you should be asking yourselves is whether I'm going to let you live long enough to regret this. It was just business, man. Just gang stuff, no. Reed moved toward them with the fluid grace of a predator. You put your hands on a woman who spends her life saving people. A nurse who worked 16 hours today keeping your worthless friends and enemies alive without judgment. Someone who represents everything good in this broken city. His voice dropped lower. That's not business. That's a declaration of war. Footsteps echoed from the mouth of the alley. Grace turned her head, saw several men in dark suits approaching. They moved with military precision, surrounding the 3 gang members efficiently. Reed knelt beside her again. The ambulance is coming. My personal medical team, they're going to take care of you, why? Grace managed through split lips. You don't know me. I know you. His dark eyes held hers. Grace Holloway. 7 years as an ER nurse. Graduated top of your class. Turned down higher-paying positions at private hospitals to stay at Memorial because you believe healthcare should serve everyone. He touched her hand briefly. I make it my business to know the people who work in my hospital, especially the ones who actually make a difference. Sirens grew closer. Reed stood, spoke quietly to one of his men, then looked back at her. Get some rest. When you wake up, the world is going to look very different. What are you going to do? Grace asked, though part of her did not want to know the answer. Reed glanced at the 3 men held by his security team. I'm going to remind this city why some people should never be touched. Why nurses and doctors and teachers and everyone who builds instead of destroys are sacred. He straightened his coat. By morning, every gang in Chicago will know your name, and know that harming you would be suicide. I don't want people hurt because of me. Too late. His expression softened fractionally. They hurt you because of choices I made, protection I failed to provide. That makes this my responsibility. Step back as paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. And I always handle my responsibilities. The last thing Grace saw before they loaded her into the ambulance was Jackson Reed standing in that alley, hands in his pockets, watching three terrified men with an expression of cold calculation. Then the doors closed and darkness took her again. When she woke, everything would be different. The quiet nurse who walked home alone, who saved lives and asked for nothing in return, who existed in grateful anonymity, had become something else without choosing it. She had become Jackson Reed's responsibility. And in Chicago, that meant she had become untouchable. The city would learn that lesson before the sun rose. Waking to a different world, Grace opened her eyes to whiteness. Not the harsh fluorescent white of Chicago Memorial, but something softer, warmer. Egyptian cotton sheets, she realized, finer than anything she had ever touched. The ceiling above her was decorated with elaborate crown molding, and through floor-to-ceiling windows. She could see the Chicago skyline spread out below like scattered diamonds. Pain crashed through her awareness. Her ribs screamed with each breath, her face felt swollen and hot, and when she tried to sit up, her body refused to cooperate. A soft beep drew her attention to medical equipment beside the bed. Professional-grade monitors, tracking her heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen levels. Easy. A woman in scrubs appeared beside her, middle-aged with kind eyes and capable hands. You have 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, and enough bruising to make a rainbow jealous. Moving is not recommended. Where am I? Grace's voice came out raspy, her throat raw. Mr. Reed's penthouse. He had his medical team set up a recovery suite. The nurse adjusted Grace's 4 with practiced efficiency. I'm Patricia, by the way. Worked for 20 years before Mr. Reed hired me for private care. You're in excellent hands. Grace's mind struggled to process this. How long have I been here? 18 hours. We kept you sedated through the worst of it. Patricia checked the monitors, made notes on a tablet. Your friend Nina has called approximately 47 times. Mr. Reed finally let her visit this morning. She's in the living room, pacing a hole in his very expensive carpet. Before Grace could respond, the door opened and Nina burst in. Her best friend looked exhausted, eyes red from crying, still wearing yesterday's scrubs. Grace. Oh my God, Grace. I'm okay, Grace started, but Nina was already at her bedside, tears streaming down her face. Okay? Grace, when you didn't show up for breakfast, I went looking. Found blood in that alley. Your phone smashed on the ground. Nina gripped her hand carefully. I thought you were dead. I thought I'd lost you. Takes more than 3 idiots to kill me. This isn't funny. Nina's voice broke. You were beaten unconscious. If Jackson Reed hadn't found you, if he hadn't been there, you would have died in that alley. The name hung between them. Grace looked past Nina to the windows, the impossible view. Where is he? Handling business, Patricia answered, adjusting Grace's pillows. He's been gone since midnight. But he left instructions that the moment you woke, we were to call him Don't. Grace said quickly, I need to think first. Nina exchanged a glance with Patricia. Grace, you need to understand something. Since last night, the entire city has changed. There are rumors everywhere about what Jackson Reed did to those men who hurt you. Truth about Jackson Reed. Grace spent the next hour listening as Nina and Patricia explained what had happened while she slept. The 3 gang members who attacked her had vanished. Not dead, according to the whispers, but worse. Reed had turned them over to every enemy they had ever made, stripped of protection, marked as targets. By dawn, they were begging police for arrest, choosing prison over what awaited them on the streets. But that was just the beginning. Reed had sent word through channels Grace did not understand, networks that existed beneath the city's surface. The message was simple and absolute. Grace Holloway was under his personal protection. Anyone who touched her, threatened her, or caused her even minor inconvenience would face consequences that made death look merciful. He shut down 3 gang operations in one night, Nina said quietly. Just erased them. Sent every member running to different cities. The ones who stayed are telling everyone that Jackson Reed is not who we think he is. What do you mean? Nina leaned closer, lowering her voice even though Patricia had left to give them privacy. There are stories, Grace. Stories about who Reed really is. Where his money actually came from. People say he is not just some tech genius who got lucky. They say he built his empire on ruins of other people's empires, that he controls half of Chicago's underground, that politicians and police commissioners answer to him. Grace felt cold despite the warm room. That's insane. He's a philanthropist. He donates millions to hospitals and schools. He does both. A new voice spoke from the doorway. Jackson Reed stood there in a perfectly tailored suit, looking nothing like the dangerous man from the alley. He looked like what the magazines showed. Successful, handsome, completely in control. I build and I destroy, depending on what's required. Nina stood quickly. Mr. Reed, I should give you 2 privacy. Reed entered the room, his movements fluid and confident. Grace should have her friend here. What I need to say concerns you both. Pulled a chair beside the bed, sat down like he had all the time in the world. How are you feeling, Grace? Like I was beaten in an alley. Accurate assessment. He studied her face, something flickering in his dark eyes. Concern, maybe? Or guilt? Patricia says you'll heal completely. The ribs will take 6 weeks, but there won't be permanent damage. Thank you, Grace meant it. For finding me. For helping me. But I don't understand why. Reed was quiet for a moment, his gaze shifting to the windows, the city below. When he spoke, his voice carried weight of old pain. When I was 16, my sister was attacked. Walking home from her job at a diner, trying to help our mother pay rent. 3 men, an alley, the same story as yours. He looked back at Grace. But there was no one to find her. No one to stop it. She died before the ambulance arrived. Nina gasped softly. Grace felt her throat tighten. Her name was Claire, Reed continued. She wanted to be a teacher. She spent her evenings tutoring neighborhood kids for free, believing education could save them from the streets. His jaw tightened. She was everything good in a world that did not deserve her. And she died because 3 animals decided her life meant nothing. I'm sorry, Grace whispered. After she died, I made a choice. Reed leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. I was smart, had a gift for technology and strategy. I could have used it legitimately, built a normal company, lived a normal life. Instead, I built something else. An empire designed to protect people like Claire, like you. People who heal and teach and build instead of destroy. The empire in the shadows for the next hour, Reed explained what Nina had only hinted at. Yes, he was a tech billionaire. His software companies were real, profitable, legitimate. But underneath that public face existed another network. Reed controlled information, security, protection for those who needed it. He moved through worlds that never touched, bridging the gap between legitimate business and the underground that actually ran cities. I'm not a good man, Reed said bluntly. I've done terrible things to people who threatened what I protect. I've ruined lives, destroyed organizations, made people disappear when they crossed lines I've drawn. He held Grace's gaze. But I only target those who prey on the innocent. Gang leaders, corrupt officials, anyone who thinks power means they can hurt people without consequences. That's vigilante justice, Grace said. That's not how the system is supposed to work. The system failed my sister. It fails people like you every day. Reed's voice hardened. How many assault cases actually get solved in this city? How many nurses and teachers and good people get hurt and their attackers walk free because of technicalities and overburdened courts? I don't accept that. So I built something that doesn't fail. Nina spoke up, her voice uncertain. Why tell us this? Why not just let Grace think you're a hero who happened to be in the right place? Because she deserves the truth. Reed stood, moved to the windows. And because staying in my protection means understanding what that protection costs. Grace is safe now, completely safe. But that safety comes from fear I've built, reputation I've earned through actions that would horrify most people. She needs to decide if she can live with that. Grace's mind raced. Everything she believed about how the world worked was shifting. What if I say no? What if I want to just go back to my life? Pretend this never happened? Reed turned back to her, and for the first time she saw vulnerability in his expression. Then I'll assign discreet security and never bother you again. You'll be protected from a distance, unaware of the shield around you. Your life will return to normal, or as normal as possible after trauma. He paused. But I'm hoping you won't choose that. Why? Because I've watched you for 2 years, Grace. Since the day I bought Memorial Hospital, I've seen how you work. You fight for every patient, treat everyone with dignity, regardless of who they are or what they've done. You represent something rare in this world. He moved closer to her bedside. And I find myself wanting to know you. Not from security reports, but really know you. The person behind the dedication. Nina looked between them, eyebrows rising. Grace felt heat flood her face despite the pain. That's insane, Grace said. You barely know me. I know you graduated with honors, but chose the emergency room over easier positions. I know you volunteer at free clinics on your days off. I know you support your younger brother through college while paying your own student loans. I know you keep a succulent garden on your apartment windowsill because you think everything deserves a chance to grow. Reed's voice softened. I know your favorite coffee is vanilla latte with extra foam, that you listen to jazz when you study, that you cry at sad movies but pretend you don't. Grace stared at him. You've been watching me? I watch everyone in my world. But with you, it became something different. I started noticing details that didn't matter for security. Started looking forward to the reports about your day. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. When I found you in that alley, when I saw what they'd done, something inside me broke. Not just anger at injustice, but personal rage that someone had touched you specifically. Choices and consequences, the room fell silent, except for the soft beeping of monitors. Nina quietly excused herself, sensing the moment required privacy. When the door closed, Grace finally spoke. Hey, this is crazy. You're a billionaire with a secret empire. I'm a nurse with student loans and a succulent garden. We exist in completely different worlds. We exist in the same city, Reed corrected. We both spend our lives trying to save it, just through different methods. You heal bodies. I eliminate threats. What if those worlds could connect? What are you asking me? Reed sat down again, and for a moment, he looked younger, less certain. I'm asking if you'll let me be part of your life. Not as a shadowy protector in the background, but as someone real. Someone who wants to know you, who wants to give you everything you deserve. He hesitated. Someone who hasn't felt anything genuine in years until... I watched you save a gang member's life because you believe every life matters. Grace closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her bruised cheeks. Everything hurt. Her body, her understanding of reality, her carefully constructed walls. I need time. I need to heal and think and figure out what any of this means. Take all the time you need. Reed stood, but his hand found hers, gentle and warm. Stay here while you recover. Let my team take care of you. And when you're ready, we'll talk about what comes next. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibilities. He left her there, surrounded by luxury and confusion. Through the windows, Chicago spread out in afternoon light, the same city as yesterday, but somehow completely different. Grace had spent 7 years saving lives anonymously, never asking for recognition or protection. Now she had both, wrapped in a package that came with darkness and danger, and a man whose eyes held ghosts. Nina returned with tea and sympathy. They talked until evening, processing impossibilities, discussing options that all felt surreal. When exhaustion finally pulled Grace towards sleep, her last thought was of Reed's question echoing in her mind. Who hurt you? 3 words that had changed everything. 3 words that had unleashed a force she was only beginning to understand. 3 words that might have saved her life but cost her the comfortable anonymity she had always hidden behind. The city outside her window glittered with secrets. Somewhere in those streets, people were learning new rules, drawing new boundaries, understanding that certain lives were no longer acceptable targets. And in a penthouse high above it all, a nurse with a succulent garden was trying to decide if she could fall for a man who built empires on protecting people like her. Morning would bring more questions, more complications, more impossible choices. But for now, Grace let herself rest in safety she had never known, surrounded by protection she had never asked for, and wonder if maybe, just maybe, this broken world could hold something beautiful after all. 6 weeks later, Grace stood in front of Chicago Memorial Hospital, her hand pressed against the same glass doors that had started everything. 6 weeks had passed since that night in the alley. 6 weeks of healing, deciding, and slowly stepping into a life she never imagined. Her ribs had healed. The bruises had faded to nothing. But the nurse who walked through these doors was different from the one who had left that November night. She carried herself with new awareness, understanding the world's hidden layers in ways that changed everything. Ready? Jackson Reed stood beside her, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He had driven her here himself. No security detail, no bodyguards. Just the two of them, in his car, talking about everything and nothing the way they had been doing for weeks. "This feels strange," Grace admitted. "Coming back to work after everything. You don't have to." "You know that." Reed's hand found hers, a gesture that had become natural over their time together. "I can set you up anywhere. Different hospital, different city if you want. Teaching position, research, anything." "I know." Grace squeezed his hand, then released it. "But this is where I belong. These people need me. And I'm not running from who I am just because the world got complicated." Pride flickered in Reed's dark eyes. "That's why I fell for you." The words hung between them, said casually but weighted with meaning. They had been dancing around feelings for weeks, growing closer through daily visits, long conversations, and stolen moments between her recovery and his business. But neither had been brave enough to define what was happening until now. "You fell for me?" Grace asked, heart racing, completely. Reed stepped closer, his presence warm and solid. "I fell for the nurse who fights for strangers, who grows succulents on windowsills, who cried during a romantic comedy last week but pretended it was allergies." He touched her face gently, tracing the line where a bruise used to be. "I fell for someone who saw the worst of what I am and chose to see the best anyway." I had learned so much about Jackson Reed over 6 weeks. The boy who lost his sister and built an empire from grief. The man who controlled Chicago's underground while donating millions to hospitals and schools. Someone capable of terrible violence and extraordinary gentleness. Depending on what the situation required, she had watched him work, seen how he protected without asking for recognition. Had met the network of people he kept safe, teachers in dangerous neighborhoods, social workers who stood against gang violence, doctors who treated everyone regardless of ability to pay. Reed's protection covered them all, an invisible shield built from fear and respect in equal measure. I fell for you too," Grace said quietly, "even though it terrifies me." Goodread smiled, rare and genuine. "It should terrify you." "I'm dangerous, Grace. My world is dangerous. But I swear on everything I have on Claire's memory that I will never let that danger touch you." The return walking into Chicago Memorial felt like coming home and entering foreign territory simultaneously. Grace had changed into her scrubs in the car, the familiar fabric grounding her. But now people stared as she moved through the emergency department. Conversations stopped. Colleagues who used to barely notice her now watched with a mix of curiosity and something else. Respect, maybe. Or fear. Nina met her at the nurse's station, pulling her into a fierce hug. "You're actually back. I thought maybe you'd stay in Reed's penthouse forever, living the princess life." "I'm a nurse, not a princess." Grace laughed, but it felt good being here. Being surrounded by controlled chaos of an ER. Dides. "Someone needs to make sure you don't kill patients with your terrible handwriting." "My handwriting is artistic." Nina grabbed a chart, thrust it at Grace. 42-year-old male, possible appendicitis. Room 3, you're back on the board. Grace took the chart, felt something settle in her chest. This was real. This was who she was, separate from Jackson Reed and his world. She was a nurse. She saved lives. And nothing that happened in an alley 6 weeks ago could take that from her. The shift passed in familiar rhythm. Patients came and went, some grateful, some angry, all needing help she was trained to provide. Grace moved between beds, starting IVs, administering medication, holding hands when people were scared. By hour 4, she had almost forgotten about the stairs, the whispers, the way security guards seemed to be everywhere she went. Then Tommy Rodriguez walked into the ER. Full. Circle Grace recognized him immediately. The 17-year-old boy she had saved the night. Everything changed. He looked healthier now, his shoulder healed, but his eyes held the same fear and gratitude from that night. Nurse Holloway. Tommy stopped several feet away, like he was afraid to get too close. Can I talk to you? Grace nodded, led him to an empty consultation room. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. I heard what happened, Tommy finally said. What my crew's rivals did to you because you saved me. His voice cracked. That's my fault. You got hurt because of me. No, Grace leaned forward. I got hurt because 3 people made terrible choices. That's not on you. But if I hadn't been in a gang, if I hadn't gotten shot, you would have just gone home safe that night. Tears tracked down Tommy's face. I've been thinking about it every day. You saved my life and almost lost yours because of it. Grace studied this kid, really looked at him. Saw past the tattoos and tough exterior to the frightened teenager underneath. Tommy, why are you here? I want out. The words burst from him. Out of the gang, out of that life. But I don't know how. They say once you're in forever. They say leaving means dying. He wiped his eyes roughly. But I can't keep living like this knowing what it cost you. What do you want to do instead? I don't know. Tommy laughed bitterly. I never finished high school. Got no skills except street stuff. Who's going to hire a gang member dropout? Grace pulled out her phone, made a call. Reed answered on the first ring. Everything okay? His voice carried instant concern. Better than okay. Grace smiled at Tommy's confused expression. Remember when you said, if I ever needed anything, I just had to ask? Always I'm calling in that favor. 20 minutes later, Tommy Rodriguez walked out of Chicago Memorial with a full scholarship to a GED program, a job lined up at one of Reed's legitimate companies, and most importantly, protection from his former gang. Reed had made 3 calls and rearranged a lifelike moving chess pieces. Why did he do that? Tommy had asked, stunned. Because I asked him to, Grace had explained. And because he believed some people deserve second chances. The confrontation that evening, as Grace's shift ended, she found Jackson Reed waiting outside the hospital. But he was not alone. A man in an expensive suit stood with him, older, gray at the temples, radiating authority and barely controlled anger. Grace Holloway. The man turned to her. I'm Lieutenant Morrison, Chicago PD. I need to ask you some questions about Jackson Reed. Grace felt tension crackle in the air. Reed's expression was calm, but she had learned to read the danger beneath his composure. What kind of questions? She asked carefully. The kind about how a tech billionaire makes gang members disappear. About how certain criminal operations shut down overnight. About whether he's running a protection racket disguised as philanthropy. Morrison's eyes narrowed. And about whether he's using his relationship with you to legitimize illegal activities. That's enough. Reed's voice cut like a blade. If you have questions about my business operations, Lieutenant, go through my lawyers. Leave Grace out of this. Can't do that. Morrison pulled out a folder, showed Grace photographs. Crime scenes, closed businesses, men with fear in their eyes. Every one of these connects back to you and Miss Holloway's attack. You crossed lines that night, Reed. Used your resources to wage a personal vendetta. Grace looked at the photos, then at Reed. Saw the truth in his face. He had done these things. Had used his power to punish those who hurt her. The scale of it was breathtaking and terrifying.
Oh.
Did you kill anyone? She asked quietly. No. Reed held her gaze. I don't kill unless there's absolutely no other option. I destroy lives, end careers, make people run scared. But I don't take life unless it's self-defense or protecting someone else's life. Morrison snorted. How noble. You're still a criminal, Reed. Just a rich one, maybe. Reed turned to the lieutenant. But I'm a criminal who funds half the police department's equipment upgrades, who provides security for schools and neighborhoods where officers won't patrol, who makes sure teachers and nurses and social workers can do their jobs without being targets. His voice hardened. So unless you have actual charges, actual evidence that will survive scrutiny from my very expensive lawyers, I suggest you remember whose donations keep this city running. The two men stared at each other, years of complicated history visible in the tension between them. Finally, Morrison looked away. This isn't over, he said. Eventually, you'll cross a line I can't ignore. And when that happens, all your money won't save you. He left, taking his folder and implications with him. Grace and Reed stood in silence as the sun set over Chicago. Is he right? Grace finally asked. Will you eventually cross a line? Probably. Reed's honesty was stark. I live in gray areas, Grace. I do what needs doing, even when it's illegal, immoral by some standards. Sooner or later, that catches up to everyone. Grace thought about Tommy Rodriguez, given a second chance because she asked. Thought about the nurses who walked home safely now, protected by Reed's reputation. Thought about all the lives saved by equipment bought with money from his legitimate businesses, and possibly his illegitimate ones too. I'm not asking you to change, she said. I'm asking if I can live with who you are, and can you? Grace took his hand, laced their fingers together. I'm a nurse. I've seen the worst of humanity come through those doors. Gang members, abusers, people who've done terrible things. And I treat them all the same because I believe everyone deserves care. She looked up at him. But I also know some people are beyond saving. Some people only understand force and fear. Maybe the world needs someone willing to be terrible to protect those who can't protect themselves. That's a dangerous philosophy for a healer. Maybe. Grace stepped closer. But I think it's the truth. The system fails people every day. And until it's fixed, someone has to fill the gaps. She touched his face. I'd rather that someone be you than anyone else. Reed kissed her then, gentle and fierce simultaneously. In that moment, Grace understood they were choosing each other despite impossibilities. A nurse and a vigilante billionaire. A healer and someone who dealt and controlled destruction. It should not work. But somehow, in a city that ran on secrets and survival, it did. The new beginning 3 months later. Grace stood in Jackson Reed's penthouse, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Behind her, the space had transformed. Her succulent garden occupied an entire wall, thriving under professional grow lights. Medical journals mixed with reeds, business magazines on the coffee table. Her scrubs hung in the closet next to his expensive suits. She had not given up her apartment entirely, maintaining independence, even as she spent more nights here than there. But slowly, impossibly, they were building something together. Reed emerged from his office, pulling off his tie. How was your shift? Saved 3 lives, probably annoyed for doctors. And taught a medical student that compassion is more important than efficiency. Grace smiled. Normal Tuesday. I had 2 legitimate business meetings and 1 slightly less legitimate negotiation with a gang leader about leaving the South Side clinic alone. Red poured 2 glasses of wine. Handed her one. Also normal Tuesday, they had fallen into rhythm. 2 people from different worlds finding ways to coexist. Grace still saved lives at Chicago Memorial. Reed still controlled his empire, protecting those who needed it through methods she chose not to examine too closely. And somehow, they made it work. Tommy called today, Grace said. He passed his GED exam. Wants to apply to community college? Pride flickered across Reed's face. That kid's going to make it. Thanks to you, thanks to both of us. Grace set down her wine glass, moved to where Reed stood by the windows. You gave him the opportunity. I just asked you to. You see potential in people. Reed pulled her close, his arm secure around her. It's one of the things I love about you. The word hung between them. Love. They had danced around it for months, but hearing it said clearly made Grace's heart race. "You love me?" she asked, completely, terrifyingly. "Ah!" Reed looked down at her, vulnerability and strength mixing in his expression. "I love that you grow succulents and cry at movies and fight for every patient like they're the only one that matters. I love that you chose to see me as human instead of monster. I love that you make me want to be better than I am." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. Even though you're dangerous and impossible, and sometimes, I think I'm insane for falling for someone who could probably take over a small country if you wanted." "Don't want a country." Reed kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "I just want you. Want this. I want to build something that matters with someone who actually gives a damn about making the world better." They stood there as night fell over Chicago. Two people who should never have found each other somehow fitting perfectly. The city below held secrets and dangers, broken systems and people trying to survive despite impossible odds. But up here, in a penthouse that had become home, Grace felt something she had not experienced in years. Safe, loved, part of something bigger than herself. "What happens now?" she asked against Reed's chest. "Now we keep going." His voice rumbled through her. "You save lives. I protect people. We figure out how to make this city a little less broken, one day at a time." He pulled back to look at her. "Together." Grace thought about the question that had changed everything 6 weeks ago. "Who hurt you?" 3 words that had unleashed protection she never asked for. Introduced her to a man she never expected, and transformed her life in ways she was still discovering. The answer to that question had set Chicago's underworld on fire, made her untouchable, and given her a partner who would burn the whole city down before letting anyone harm her again.